When Layla went missing, I was devastated. After 5 days of searching, she suddenly returned home tired, dirty, but safe. There was a camera on her collar, and I decided to watch the recording to find out where she had been. What I saw shocked me to the core. What do you think the camera could have recorded? Share your guesses in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this incredible story. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood. I was sipping my coffee, half listening to the faint chirping of birds and the hum of morning traffic. Layla, my 7-year-old golden retriever, was lying by the front door, her favorite spot to watch the world go by. She loved mornings, always eager to chase the fleeting shadows of birds or sniff out the fresh scent of dew-soaked grass. That day, though, something was different. The air seemed restless, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. I'd left the gate slightly ajar while bringing in groceries the previous night, a careless mistake I would come to regret. Layla noticed the gap before I did. I was pouring the last of my coffee when I heard the soft clink of her collar. By the time I turned around, she was gone, a flash of golden fur disappearing down the driveway. At first, I wasn't alarmed. Layla had wandered off before, but she always came back after a few minutes of exploring. I stepped outside, calling her name, expecting her to come bounding back, tail wagging, as she always did. But the street was silent. I walked to the gate and scanned the neighborhood. Nothing. I called her again, louder this time, my voice echoing down the empty street. Still nothing. A twinge of worry crept into my chest as I grabbed her leash and set off in the direction she had run. The first hour passed in a blur of frantic searching. I walked up and down every street in the neighborhood, asking neighbors if they had seen her. She's a golden retriever, about this tall, I'd say, gesturing with my hand. Everyone shook their heads sympathetically. By midday, the panic had fully set in. I called the local shelters, posted in neighborhood groups online, and printed flyers with her picture. The sight of her smiling face on those flyers, her tongue lolling out in that goofy, happy way of hers, made my heart ache. The second day was worse. I barely slept that night, imagining all the terrible things that could have happened to her. What if she had gotten lost in the woods? What if someone had taken her? Every time the phone rang, I jumped, hoping it was someone calling about Layla, but each time it was just a neighbor offering condolences or advice. By the third day, I started to lose hope. The house felt unbearably empty without her. Her favorite toys lay untouched in the corner, and her food bowl sat on the kitchen floor, still half full from the morning she disappeared. The silence was deafening. Yet, even in my despair, a part of me refused to give up. Layla was more than just a pet, she was family. I spent hours walking through the woods, searching for any sign of her. I left pieces of her blanket in places she might pass, hoping the familiar scent would guide her home. Day 4 came and went with no sign of her. My heart felt heavy, but I kept telling myself she was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. I replayed every memory of her in my mind, her playful bark, the way she would nudge my hand when she wanted attention, the way she'd rest her head on my lap during thunderstorms. And then, on the 5th day, just as I was beginning to lose hope entirely, it happened. The sound of soft scratching at the front door pulled me out of my restless thoughts. My breath caught as I ran to the door and flung it open. There she was, Layla. Dirty, tired, but alive. Tears welled up in my eyes as I knelt down to hug her. Her tail wagged weakly, but her eyes still held that familiar spark of love and trust. But this was only the beginning. As I hugged her tightly, my gaze fell on the small camera still attached to her collar. For the first time in days, a new feeling stirred in me, curiosity. What had Layla been through? Where had she gone? I didn't know it yet, but the answers hidden in that camera would change everything I thought I knew. It was the 5th day, and the house felt emptier than ever. I had given up pacing and sat slumped on the couch, staring blankly at the stack of flyers I'd printed. Layla's face smiled up at me from the glossy paper, her goofy grin a stark contrast to the gloom that filled the room. Every sound outside, a rustling tree, a passing car, made me jump, but each time, it wasn't her. By late afternoon, I was too drained to keep going. My searches had led me to every corner of the neighborhood, the woods, and even abandoned lots, yet Layla was nowhere to be found. The thought of losing her forever was beginning to feel all too real. I leaned back, closing my eyes, when a faint, familiar sound jolted me upright. Scratching. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder. My heart skipped a beat as I bolted to the front door. I flung it open, my breath catching in my throat. There she was. Layla stood on the porch, her golden fur matted with dirt and leaves. Her usually bright coat was dulled, and her paws were caked with mud. Her collar hung slightly askew, and the once shiny camera attached to it was scratched but still intact. Her eyes, though tired, met mine with a spark of recognition, and her tail gave a weak but unmistakable wag. "Layla!" I cried, falling to my knees as tears blurred my vision. She took a shaky step forward, her body swaying slightly from exhaustion. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her warmth against me. She let out a soft whimper, pressing her nose into my shoulder, as if to say, "I'm home." I couldn't stop the flood of emotions, relief, joy, disbelief all crashing over me at once. For a moment, nothing else mattered. My best friend was back. But as the initial wave of joy subsided, I noticed the details. Layla's condition told a story of hardship. Small scratches lined her legs, and a tiny patch of fur near her side was missing, revealing a faint scar. Her usually strong frame seemed thinner, and her eyes held a weariness I'd never seen before. I gently guided her inside, grabbing a towel to clean her up. She didn't resist, sitting patiently as I wiped the grime from her fur and inspected her paws. I whispered reassurances to her, my voice trembling, "It's okay, girl. You're safe now." As I cleaned her, my mind raced with questions. Where had she been? What had happened to her? Her condition suggested she'd been on quite the journey, but there was no way to know the full story, at least, not yet. Then I remembered the camera. I unclipped it from her collar, the device surprisingly still intact despite the scratches. My fingers lingered on it, hesitant but eager to see what it had recorded. For now, though, Layla needed rest. I laid out her favorite blanket in the corner of the living room and brought her a bowl of water. She drank greedily, her tail thumping softly against the floor. Watching her settle in, I felt a wave of gratitude. Whatever she had endured, she was here now, and that was all that mattered. But as she drifted off to sleep, the camera in my hand seemed to burn with unanswered questions. I placed it on the coffee table, unable to shake the feeling that it held the key to the mystery of her disappearance. Layla was back, but her return was only the beginning of the story. What secrets had her journey left behind? Layla was finally home, curled up on her favorite blanket, her breathing slow and steady as she rested. The relief of having her back was immeasurable, but it wasn't long before curiosity began to take hold. My eyes kept drifting toward the small, scratched camera sitting on the coffee table. That tiny device, still attached to Layla's mud-streaked collar, was my only connection to the 5 days she had been missing. I picked up the camera, turning it over in my hands. The casing was scuffed, and there was a faint crack across the lens, but it still seemed functional. I had attached it to her collar weeks ago, thinking it would be fun to see the world from her perspective, how she sniffed around the yard, chased squirrels, or napped in the sun. I never imagined it would become a critical piece of evidence in unraveling a mystery. Plugging the camera into my laptop, I felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. What would I see? Her running through the woods? Lost and scared? Or, worse, hurt or in danger? My hands trembled slightly as I opened the first file. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Layla, in the moment she bolted through the open gate. The footage was shaky, her collar bouncing as she ran, but I could make out familiar landmarks, the street outside my house, the neighbor's garden, and the line of trees marking the edge of the neighborhood. At first, it was what I expected, Layla following her nose, zigzagging across lawns and into the woods. Her tail wagged slightly in the corner of the frame, a sign of her usual curiosity. But then the footage took an unexpected turn. The camera showed her venturing deeper into the forest than I had ever seen her go. The trees grew denser, their canopies blocking out most of the light. Layla slowed down, her ears twitching at every sound: a rustle in the underbrush, the distant call of a bird. Suddenly, her posture changed. Her tail dropped, and she crouched low, her head turning sharply toward something off-screen. My pulse quickened. What had she seen? The camera angle shifted as she darted forward, her movements cautious but purposeful. Minutes turned into hours on the footage as Layla wandered further from home. She crossed streams, climbed over fallen logs, and occasionally stopped to sniff the air. I noticed small moments of struggle, her paws slipping on wet rocks, her fur catching on brambles. But what struck me most was her determination. She wasn't aimlessly wandering, it seemed as though she was searching for something or someone. Then came the first real surprise. The camera captured a faint glow in the distance, like a campfire or lantern. Layla hesitated, her ears perking up. She moved closer, the light growing brighter until it illuminated a small clearing. The video blurred slightly as Layla crouched low, hiding behind a cluster of bushes. My heart pounded as I leaned closer to the screen. The camera showed figures, people moving around the clearing. They were bundled in heavy jackets, their faces shadowed, speaking in low voices I couldn't make out. What were they doing out there? Why had Layla stopped here? The footage continued, showing her watching them for several minutes before creeping away, as if sensing danger. By the time the video reached its third hour, I realized this wasn't just a simple adventure. Layla had encountered something or someone that had altered the course of her journey. Each new scene raised more questions than it answered. I paused the footage and leaned back, my mind racing. The camera held so much more than I had anticipated. Layla's disappearance wasn't random, and whatever had happened out there was far more complex than a dog getting lost. I glanced at her sleeping form, her sides rising and falling peacefully. She had been through so much, yet her loyalty had brought her back to me. I owed it to her and myself to find out the full story. Turning back to the laptop, I steeled myself and pressed play, ready to uncover the secrets of her 5-day journey. The video started innocently enough, Layla darting through the open gate, her collar bouncing slightly with each bound. The world through her eyes felt familiar, the street I had walked countless times, the neighbor's garden with its neat rows of roses, and the distant hum of passing cars. Yet, even in those early moments, there was a restlessness in her movements, as though she were chasing something unseen. The camera captured her weaving through the neighborhood, her tail wagging with excitement. She stopped briefly to sniff at a mailbox, then trotted down the sidewalk, her paws patting against the pavement. But as she reached the edge of the familiar world, the line of trees marking the beginning of the forest, her pace slowed. Her ears twitched, and she lifted her head, sniffing the air. The forest loomed ahead, dark and sprawling. She hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the street, then plunged into the thicket. The footage became shakier as she navigated the uneven terrain, her paws crunching leaves and snapping twigs. The sunlight filtered through the trees in dappled patterns, casting fleeting shadows on the forest floor. It was here that the ordinary began to slip away. Layla moved with purpose, her tail lowered, her steps cautious. She paused frequently, her head tilting at strange sounds, rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, or the faint trickle of water. The camera caught glimpses of wildlife, a startled deer bounding away, a pair of curious raccoons scurrying up a tree. But then there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. The camera caught fleeting movements in the background, just out of focus. Shapes darting between the trees, too large to be animals but too quick to be clearly seen. Layla's behavior changed as well. Her usual carefree energy gave way to something more deliberate. She stopped frequently, sniffing the ground, her ears swiveling toward every sound. At one point, the footage captured her crossing a narrow road deep in the forest. The asphalt was cracked and overgrown, as though it hadn't been used in years. Layla froze in the middle, her head snapping toward the tree line. The camera picked up a low growl, not from her, but from somewhere in the shadows. She didn't run. Instead, she crouched low and crept toward the sound. My heart raced as I watched her approach a dense cluster of bushes. The growl came again, louder this time, and then the camera caught a glimpse of the source, a large, unfamiliar animal with glowing yellow eyes. It wasn't a wolf, nor any creature I recognized. Layla stopped a safe distance away, her body tense, her breathing audible through the microphone. The animal didn't attack, it simply stared, unblinking, before retreating into the shadows. The encounter seemed to leave Layla shaken. She lingered for a moment, then turned and continued deeper into the forest. The footage grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon, the dim light replaced by the eerie glow of the moon. Her path became harder to follow, the underbrush thick and unyielding. Then came another strange moment. The camera captured a clearing illuminated by faintly glowing mushrooms. Their soft, otherworldly light bathed the area in an ethereal blue-green hue. Layla sniffed at the ground, her curiosity overriding her caution. The forest here felt alive in a way that was both beautiful and unsettling, as though it were watching her. The footage ended abruptly as the camera battery began to die, leaving me with more questions than answers. Where was this glowing clearing? What was that creature? And why did Layla seem so determined, as though she were following an unseen guide? As I sat back, the screen dark, I realized I wasn't just uncovering Layla's journey, I was stepping into a world I barely understood. The forest, so close to home yet so alien in its mysteries, was no ordinary place. And Layla, my loyal companion, had seen more of it in those 5 days than I ever could have imagined. As I continued watching the footage, Layla's cautious steps led her deeper into the unknown, and the forest around her grew darker and more foreboding. The cheerful chirping of birds and rustling leaves from earlier had faded into an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional crunch of her paws on fallen twigs. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A sharp, distant sound, like the crack of a branch underfoot, caught Layla's attention. She froze, her body tense, her ears swiveling toward the source. The camera captured the faintest flicker of movement ahead, barely visible through the thick underbrush. Layla crept forward, each step deliberate, her breathing steady but audible. The footage was shaky as her collar shifted with her movements, but the shapes ahead slowly came into focus. At first, I thought they might be animals, perhaps deer or another group of raccoons, but as the scene cleared, it became evident they were people. There were 2 of them, crouched near what looked like a makeshift campsite. Their faces were obscured by the hoods of their jackets, and they spoke in low, hurried tones, their words indistinguishable. A small fire burned between them, casting flickering shadows across their figures. The camera picked up a faint metallic glint in the dirt nearby, tools, or perhaps something less benign. Layla hesitated, her posture low and wary. She seemed to sense something was off. These weren't hikers or campers out for a peaceful night in the woods. The campsite looked hastily constructed, and their behavior was far from casual. One of them suddenly stood, their movements sharp and deliberate, as they scanned the area, almost as if they had heard something. My heart raced as I watched Layla retreat slightly, careful to stay out of sight. The angle of the camera shifted as she ducked behind a bush, but her focus remained locked on the figures. Then came a moment that made my stomach drop. One of the strangers pointed into the trees, directly in Layla's direction. The other quickly followed, and they both stood still, staring into the darkness. For a moment, it seemed as though they had spotted her. The footage caught a flicker of tension in their movements, one of them reaching for something at their side, a knife, perhaps, or a flashlight. But then, a loud noise erupted from the opposite direction, a crashing sound, like something large barreling through the underbrush. The strangers immediately turned their attention to the commotion, their voices rising in alarm. Layla seized the opportunity, darting away from the campsite and deeper into the forest. The footage grew chaotic as she ran, the camera bouncing wildly with each leap. Her breathing was heavy, and the sound of snapping branches echoed all around her. Whatever had caused the noise back at the campsite, it seemed to be moving, too, though in the opposite direction. After what felt like an eternity, Layla slowed, her pace cautious once more. She stopped near a small creek, the moonlight reflecting off the water, and paused to drink. Her tail was low, her body language still tense, as though she wasn't yet out of danger. And then the camera picked up another sound. This time, it was softer footsteps, deliberate and steady, approaching from behind. Layla turned her head, and the angle of the footage shifted just enough to capture a shadow moving between the trees. It wasn't one of the strangers from before. This figure was alone, tall, and cloaked in darkness. Layla growled softly, her warning low but firm, yet the figure didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to pause, watching her. The tension in the footage was almost unbearable, the standoff between them stretching on for what felt like hours. Then, just as suddenly as the figure appeared, it turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving only silence in its wake. Layla waited for several long seconds before cautiously moving forward, her tail still low. By the time the footage ended, I was gripping the edge of my chair, my mind racing with questions. Who were those strangers? What were they doing in the forest, and why did they seem so alert and on edge? And what of the shadowy figure that had followed Layla? It was clear that her journey had been more perilous than I could have imagined. She had navigated not just the dangers of the wilderness but also the presence of mysterious people and an enigmatic figure whose intentions remained unclear. For Layla, survival wasn't just about finding her way home, it was about avoiding threats I was only beginning to comprehend. The footage I had watched so far hinted at a journey filled with danger and intrigue, but nothing prepared me for what came next. As I opened the final set of files, my heart pounded with anticipation. The camera on Layla's collar had already revealed mysterious strangers, glowing forests, and strange creatures, but the answers to the biggest questions still felt just out of reach. The new video began in silence, Layla cautiously walking through a narrow, overgrown trail. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above, and the soft crunch of her paws on the ground was the only sound. She stopped frequently, her ears flicking at every distant rustle. It was clear she was tired, her steps slower, her breathing heavier. But then, the atmosphere shifted. In the distance, faint voices echoed. This time, they weren't low and hushed like before. They were urgent, panicked. Layla's body tensed, and she tilted her head, listening. The voices grew louder as she followed the sound, her pace quickening despite her exhaustion. The camera revealed a clearing up ahead, the ground lit by a dim but steady glow. As Layla approached, the source of the light became clear, a small lantern hanging from a makeshift wooden post. Beneath it, a young girl, no older than 10, sat huddled against the base of a tree, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her clothes torn and disheveled. Layla stopped, her tail wagging ever so slightly. The girl noticed her immediately, her wide, fearful eyes softening at the sight of the dog. "Hey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not one of them, are you?" The girl reached out tentatively, and Layla took a cautious step forward. The footage showed her leaning in to sniff the girl's hand, then pressing her nose against the girl's cheek in a gentle, reassuring gesture. For the first time in days, the girl smiled faintly. But the moment of calm was short-lived. A crashing sound erupted from the forest behind them, and the girl's smile vanished. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the lantern, and began moving quickly, with Layla following close behind. The camera jostled as they ran, the girl's frantic breaths audible over the crackling leaves and snapping branches. At one point, she stumbled, but Layla stopped immediately, circling back to nudge her forward. It was clear now Layla wasn't just lost, she was protecting this child. As they pressed on, the voices from before returned, louder and angrier. The camera captured fleeting glimpses of figures in the distance, shadows moving through the trees, their intentions clearly far from kind. The girl whispered, "This way," and veered off the path, leading Layla toward what looked like an old, abandoned cabin. The footage became eerily still as they reached the cabin. The girl pushed open the creaking door and ushered Layla inside. The room was bare except for a few dusty crates and a broken chair, but it offered them temporary shelter. The girl sat down, pulling Layla close, her small hands gripping the dog's fur as though holding onto the last thread of safety. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the girl's uneven breathing. But then, footsteps approached. The shadows outside the cabin grew larger, and the door rattled as if someone was testing it. Layla growled softly, her body a tense barrier between the girl and the threat outside. The next moments were chaotic. The camera caught the door bursting open, revealing two of the figures from the earlier campsite. Their faces were obscured, but their movements were aggressive, their intentions clear. Layla lunged, her growls turning into barks that echoed through the small cabin. The camera captured the scuffle in shaky, fragmented shots, Layla darting toward one of the intruders, her teeth bared, forcing them to retreat slightly. The girl seized the opportunity to grab a long, broken stick from the ground and waved it wildly, yelling for them to leave. Then, as suddenly as it began, the figures retreated, their voices fading into the forest. Layla stood at the doorway, her body still tense, her ears perked, as if ensuring they wouldn't return. The girl knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking with gratitude. The footage ended with the girl leading Layla out of the cabin at dawn, the forest bathed in soft, golden light. Together, they found a road, where the girl flagged down a passing car. The final moment showed Layla watching as the girl was safely driven away, her small hand waving goodbye through the back window. When the screen went dark, I sat in stunned silence. Layla hadn't just wandered off or gotten lost, she had been part of something far bigger than I ever imagined. She had protected someone, guided them to safety, and possibly saved a life. I looked over at her sleeping form, her chest rising and falling peacefully. She was more than just my dog, she was a hero. And now I understood, her journey had a purpose, one that left me in awe of her courage and loyalty. The screen went black, but my thoughts were a flurry of images and emotions. Layla's journey, her courage, her instincts, everything I had seen on that footage had shifted the way I saw her. She wasn't just a dog who had wandered off, she was a protector, a guide, and, in a way, a survivor of something extraordinary. I sat back in my chair, staring at the small, scratched camera on the table. It was hard to reconcile the playful, tail-wagging companion I thought I knew with the fearless, determined animal I had seen on screen. Layla had faced more danger in 5 days than I had in my entire life. And yet, she had returned dirty, tired, and a little bruised, but whole, as if her only mission was to come home to me after fulfilling a greater purpose. I glanced over at her now, sprawled out on her blanket, her paws twitching slightly in her sleep. Did she know how much she had done? Could she sense the weight of what her actions had meant to that little girl, lost and scared in the woods? The forest that Layla had traversed, the glowing clearing, the shadowy figures, it all seemed like something out of a novel. Yet it was real, captured through her eyes, her choices. What struck me most was her unyielding loyalty, not just to me, but to the child she had found. She could have turned back, avoided danger, and come home sooner. But she didn't. That realization hit me hard. I had always seen Layla as my protector, my rock during life's storms, but this was something far deeper. Her instincts to care, to shield the vulnerable, went beyond anything I had trained her to do. It was as if she carried a purpose all her own, an innate sense of right and wrong that guided her through the chaos. And then there was the girl. Who was she? Where had she come from, and what was she running from? I couldn't stop thinking about her frightened face, the way she clung to Layla like a lifeline. Her presence in the footage added a layer of mystery that I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to fully unravel. I made a mental note to contact the authorities, to see if they could trace her or the strangers from the forest. But beyond the questions and the intrigue, one truth stood out above all else: Layla wasn't just a pet. She was a being with her own story, her own experiences, and a depth I hadn't fully appreciated before. Her journey changed something in me. It was easy to get lost in the routine of daily life, to assume that everything within the bounds of my world was all that mattered. But Layla had ventured beyond those bounds. She had stepped into a larger, more unpredictable world and come back with a story I never could have imagined. I found myself wondering how often we underestimate the beings we share our lives with: dogs, cats, animals we see as companions but who carry within them the capacity for so much more. Layla's adventure reminded me that every creature, no matter how small, has the potential for bravery, selflessness, and resilience. In the days that followed, I couldn't look at Layla the same way. I spoiled her more than ever, of course, extra treats, belly rubs, and long naps on the couch. But there was also a newfound respect, a quiet awe. She wasn't just my dog anymore, she was my equal in so many ways, a partner who had her own journey, her own trials, and her own triumphs. As I sat there, reflecting on everything I had seen, I realized that Layla's story wasn't just about her 5 days in the forest. It was a reminder to me, and perhaps to anyone who hears it, that courage doesn't come from size, power, or strength. It comes from the heart. And Layla's heart was larger and braver than I ever could have imagined. For the rest of her life, Whenever I looked at her, I saw not just a golden retriever but a hero. A dog who had ventured into the unknown, faced dangers I could barely comprehend, and returned home carrying a story that would change both of us forever.